Welcome to Podcast to Connect. If you are using a podcast or want to use a podcast to find your people and make connections with them, whether it be for business or community purpose, then this is the place for you. Hi, I'm Steph from Coffee Like Media, and I've been podcasting for quite a while. And I have definitely grown my community and my business, both from podcasting as well as supporting mediums like newsletters and YouTube channels. And we'll talk all about that, don't worry. But I wanted to share some of the things that I have learned throughout the years, as well as some of the conversations I'm having with people about the different things we're doing to connect to folks in the podcasting space and what glorious things come out of those connections. In this first season, I'm repurposing episodes from earlier versions of Podcast to Connect, one of which was a 30-day experience called National Podcast Post Month, where a bunch of editors came on to the podcast and gave tips and advice on how to maneuver your podcast to sound good. And then it grew from there into more of the connective and outreach and community focus of podcasting. I've taken a smattering of both of those flavors, and here are 11 of those that I think give you a variety, a bouquet, a rainbow, shall we say, of different tips that I think will help your business or community podcast. If you need help with your podcast, feel free to reach out to me at coffeelikemedia.com. All right, let's get on with today's tip. Today, I'm delighted to have Neal Veglio join me. His blunt and so needed conversation threads of true podcasting wisdom on LinkedIn are amazing, and you should go check it out. Oh, and he's also an audio wizard to boot. But before we start, I am pleased to say that this episode is sponsored by StreamYard, the very platform that we record, go live, and distribute these videos onto YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Yes, the full videos on all those platforms. Thank you, StreamYard. Hello, Neal.
Hello, Steph. Lovely to talk to you again. It's been too long, my friend.
It has. It very much so has. We're cutting straight to the chase, so let me tell you what today's episode is. Are you ready?
Please.
Well, you know, so that question was really towards the listeners.
Oh, okay. I thought I was playing a part here. Carry on.
So during the previous 19 days, I've noticed that I'm stumbling over describing things within the small business or entrepreneurial space, because I'm not talking to the big corporate companies, the networks, those folks, even if they're entrepreneurs, even if they've got a business, that's not who would really use our services. It's not really who these tips are for. They have people on staff for this kind of thing. But how to define and how to talk to and what terminology to use to talk about that space. So I have this theory, and I swear I'm going to stop talking soon. I have this theory that there's the network or corporate podcast, there's the indie podcast, and then there's this third space, which is the business, small business, entrepreneurial, branded podcasts. What think you?
I'm 100% on board. I think the rest of the industry at this stage isn't necessarily. I think what they all come under is an umbrella term of branded podcast. So that's right. Everything from your, large scale corporates that are doing like TED Talks, the banks. Mm-hmm. I've seen so many adverts for banks like NatWest doing their own podcast. NatWest is a huge bank in the UK and certainly internationally as well, I think. And a lot of sort of cryptocurrency based banks that are doing podcasts as well. And they're lumped together with your solopreneurs. So, for example, I work with a number of solopreneurs, both actively production and also consultancy based services. And the one thing I can tell you about all of them, all the solopreneurs, is they don't consider themselves necessarily to be branded podcasts. Huh. They look at themselves as kind of indies, people that are doing a podcast that they accept it's a marketing tool. But interestingly, they're really resistant to the sales messaging of what they're doing. They're all about putting out and I hate this term. I really hate this term, but I'm going to use it because it's the most commonly used one. Value
I
They're
love
all
that
about putting
term.
I hate that term. Oh God, it's a Pat Flynn term. It was great in 2008. Let's let it die. Let's just tell it what it is, which is insights. It's insights, it's nuggets, it's tips, it's advice. And, I think that's the thing is they're hot on putting out those insights and those gold nugget moments. Gems, I believe you call them, actually. Whereas the sales part of it, they're just kind of like, well, there's an underlying tone that this is a branded podcast and that I would like to generate some inquiries from it, but that's not what I want to be seen for. Whereas the branded podcasts, as in the actual brands, the corporates, they're all about, right, pre-roll message, 20 seconds. Make sure that you sign up for our newsletter. Make sure that you get booked onto this course. Make sure that you attend this expo that we're doing. There's one podcast that I work on in the alternative space. Let's put it that way. If you've been to Amsterdam, you'll know what I'm talking about. Certain cafes, they sell this product.
Yes.
And, they're all about the news, industry updates. They're not necessarily, number one, there's a whole legislational aspect to this anyway. So there's only a certain amount of marketing messaging that they can do. But they're not afraid to talk about their website, their newsletter, the podcast and bonus content and things like that. So for me, it's an interesting perspective of the sort of the approach from the kind of the smaller indie, as you would say, the indie branded versus the people that are, well, we're here for a reason. We're here to make money. So of course we're going to talk about our branding and our messaging on the podcast. So yeah, I think honestly, if you're looking at formalizing this, I believe, my own personal belief is that next year, I think podcasting is going to start to understand, appreciate, and accept these different strands of podcasts and separate them a little bit more into their own space. And I think Apple Podcasts probably is starting to move that way now. With the whole thing with subscription podcasts. That's kind of like a step towards that, I believe.
Okay. You've just dropped a lot. Let's back up and dissect this for a bit. I kept thinking, oh wait, no, but that's a lot. But okay, so gems, value, insights, whatever you call it, I appreciate, and I think that's why I never thought I'd say this, but I think that's why I like the smaller entrepreneurial or small business podcasts, is because they really do seem to come more from the heart and from like a genuine sense of doing something than just, we need to constantly sell. And that might be idealistic, and I don't care. I'll wear that badge. But the hesitation is that they don't want to be sales. So it feels like there is that space for that to be an official thing, whatever that would even mean. But what would that be called if it's not branded podcast, if it's not, because also when I say small business podcast, I feel like I'm pigeonholing a company into never having huge sales. And I don't want to do that either. So like, what do we call these people? How do we address them in a way that they want to be addressed, that attracts them and not someone else? Because it is a very different feel between them and the bigger branded podcasts.
I think Apple Podcasts is already doing it. It's just that it's at the moment it's a category. It's a fringe category. It's called entrepreneur. And the majority of podcasts that you'll see in there, you get your Gary V experience, you get John Lee Dumas, you get all those kinds of big names that are still essentially entrepreneurs. They're still one-man bands that obviously are built around themselves. They built teams, but they are, in a sense, they are still entrepreneurs. And I think what Apple are probably going to start to do next year, I think it's going to follow the radio model. The radio model, I know in the US it's very similar as well, and the UK kind of eventually followed it, where you had like two strands of radio, and now I'd say it's even closer to three strands. So you've got your big corporates, so that's your what used to be Clear Channel, now iHeartMedia. You've got your Citadel Broadcasting, you've got your Emis Broadcasting, you've got your Beasley Brothers, and those are like the big networks of radio stations, the big commercials. Then you've got your second tier, which is kind of, you're not quite bought out by a group, but they're maybe you got NPR in there as well, sort of slightly less commercial, a bit more homegrown. And then you got your third strand, which is your real mums and pops, local market stations in this country. You've got commercial, you've got independent, and then you've got community. And community is literally not-for-profit radio stations where all the money they make from advertising revenue goes back into the project.
Non-profit, yeah.
Yeah, they've got a board of directors to have to keep paying off every year to keep them interested. So, and I think podcasting is going to go that same way, that you're going to have your top line kind of, how I built this. Dad wrote a porno. The one that the girl that everyone gets annoyed with because she's so controversial. I forget her name. The Joe Rogans of this world. Yeah. Then you've got your next tier down, which is probably podcasts that, and I hate this word, chart, that you're familiar with, that are not necessarily top line corporates. Yeah. And then I think there's going to be another tier, which is going to be somewhere around where we're talking now, which might even split further from branded to hobbyist.
Right. And by tiers, you're not, and you're saying like tier and down, you don't mean in quality, you just mean in like revenue or in influence or both?
Just in terms of different sectors. I mean, there are some people that with the radio model, people wouldn't look at an NPR station necessarily if they listen to NPR and go, well, that's less than a, Hot 97. They're just going to go, that's a different thing. That's a different type of content. I don't want to hear Justin Bieber play 24 times a day. I want to hear discussion topics. And I think it's the same thing. It
is. It's like comparing independent hobbyists, podcasters, whatever you want to call them, to Joe Rogan, who is an independent, or at least was an independent podcaster for the majority of his time, to then comparing a very big name brand to a solopreneur. Like, it's just those two sets don't match. Like, it's off. It's just off. So in essence, what we're saying is there is that murkier branded small business entrepreneurial space that, it's just not identified as much, because they're the middle child. It finally just dawned on me, Marsha, because they're not Cindy and they're not Marsha. They're Jan. They're in between. They're in between in revenue. They're in between in visibility, and they're in between in goals, because they don't have the same goals as just an independent or as a big network. So yeah, it's all about the Brady Bunch, of course. Of course it is.
The title of this episode. It's all about
the Brady Bunch. Oh, this thumbnail is going to be so much fun to create. All right. So having said that, Neal, where can folks find you online?
Oh, just search.
Just remember not to pronounce the G when you meet him. Neal Veglio. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Podcast to Connect. I'll have all of the information in the show notes or video notes, depending on where you are consuming this. Again, Podcast to Connect is available in audio and video format. And and if you need any help with your podcast, feel free to reach out at coffeelikemedia.com. Thanks so much. Bye.